My base case is that Ethereum should now rally to an all-time high. That is what I think is going to happen. Now, I would be willing to accept I'm wrong and to cut my losses on a weekly close by Bitcoin below its 50-week moving average. If we get weekly, and maybe 2 weekly closes, if we get 2 weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, then I'm wrong. Because historically, whenever Bitcoin gets weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, that's the end of the cycle. Okay, so I think Ethereum is going to rally to a new all-time high.
Ethereum just pulled off the kind of move that separates real market cycles from wishful thinking. Ben Cowen says the general expectation was simple. Once Ethereum retraced to its base level, it would rally toward new all-time highs. But he warned the first breakout attempt would probably fail, and that's exactly what happened. When Ethereum hit its local top in August, Cowen predicted about a 30% pullback. That's almost exactly how things played out. Now that the correction's done, he thinks it's time to flip the bias back to bullish. Cowen explains it like this. The bullish phase started earlier in the year when Ethereum went home, returning to a key support level. That run lasted until the August peak, where he expected a reset back to the bull market support band. During that move, Ethereum's USD price kept rising, but its value against Bitcoin started slipping, eventually finding support near the 20-week moving average. With that move complete, Cowen says the setup now favors another push higher. Still, there's one critical line in the sand. The base case is that Ethereum keeps moving upward, but if Bitcoin closes below its 50-week moving average for 2 straight weeks, that would likely signal the current bull cycle is over. Until then, Cowen says the trend points up, not down. If you found value in this breakdown, please hit the like button, subscribe, and share it with other investors who are paying attention. We're here to keep bringing you sharp analysis and voices that actually understand what's unfolding. Thanks for watching.
And essentially the narrative was that after Ethereum went home, it would then rally to new all-time highs. Unfortunately, the first rally to new all-time highs would get rejected. This was always going to happen, right? And we said that when the local high in August occurs, that we should get a 30% correction back down. What's interesting is if you look at the move here from the high to the low, 30% drop. So it's already happened, right? It's already happened. So for me at this point, I have to flip the bias, right? We were bullish on it down here when it went home. And we've been bullish on it up until August. But back then, on the sweep of the all-time high, it made sense to think that ETH would drop back to the bull market support band. And while it did that, the valuation against Bitcoin would also drop to the 20-week SMA. And sure enough, when Ethereum hit a new all-time high on its USD pair, ETH Bitcoin started to bleed. And guess where it just found its current low? Well, we'll talk about this in a minute. It just found a low right around that 20-week moving average. So where do we go from here? Well, I will continue to make some bold calls, right, as we have been for Ethereum and dominance and everything. I'll continue to do that. Just know that I probably will get something wrong relatively soon. And because of that, we have to talk about, like, what is the contingency plan? All right. So what is my base case now? Well, I already told you my base case back in August. My base case was 30% drop, then rally to new all-time highs. Now, I got people coming out today and being like, well, what about tariffs? Does that change anything? All that stuff doesn't matter. It just doesn't. And I know that sounds crazy. It just doesn't matter. Someone said, well, now that it's happened, or have you changed your mind? I'm like, no, because I thought this was going to happen. Now, it's true that if the top were already in for Ethereum, it's true that eventually it would get to the bull market support band, making me think I was right, and maybe it just continues to drop. But for now, my base case is that Ethereum should now rally to an all-time high. That is what I think is going to happen. Now, I would be willing to accept I'm wrong and to cut my losses on a weekly close by Bitcoin below its 50-week moving average. If we get weekly, and maybe 2 weekly closes, if we get 2 weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, then I'm wrong. Because historically, whenever Bitcoin gets weekly closes below the 50-week moving average, that's the end of the cycle. Okay, so I think Ethereum is going to rally to a new all-time high. However, I would have to pivot my view on 2 weekly closes by Bitcoin below the 50-week moving average. The reason for that is because Bitcoin leads the bull market. And if the bull market is already over, if the top is already in, then there's not really a great chance that Ethereum would then rally to a new all-time high. It's not impossible, but it would not be my base case at this point.
Ethereum's been quietly outpacing most of the crypto market, and Ben Cowen says that's no coincidence. Back in April, when the ETH/BTC chart touched its long-term logarithmic regression support line, it marked what looked like a potential bottom. Historically, that's been a launch point for Ethereum. Each time it's reached that zone, strong rebounds have followed. That's why Cowen turned bullish earlier in the year, even as most altcoins were still struggling. And that contrast hasn't changed much. While Ethereum has managed to stabilize and climb, most altcoin pairs against Bitcoin have kept sliding, setting new cycle lows. The weakness across smaller coins highlights just how much relative strength Ethereum is showing right now. Cowen's takeaway is simple but important. Ethereum looks better positioned than the rest of the altcoin market. Many smaller tokens have dropped so far that even a big alt season would only bring them back to break even in Bitcoin terms. Ethereum, on the other hand, seems to have already weathered the worst of its downside and could be ready to lead the next leg higher. The only real threat? A confirmed breakdown in Bitcoin. If that happens, everything, including Ethereum, would have to reset. Let's get back to the interview.
If you look at the ROI from peak to peak and you compare this cycle to the 2016-2017 cycle, that cycle lasted 1,473 days. We're currently on day 1,433. There's not a lot of time left. And if you measure it from the low, it already looks kind of scary. It already looks like we've maybe gone as far as we can. And maybe this is the chart that is actually responsible for the liquidation cascade and not the tariffs. People will assign narratives to things because it makes them feel better. It makes them rationalize, but the news cycle just simply does not matter. So when it comes to Ethereum, why did I flip my bias in April? Why was I willing to call for new all-time highs on the rally that started in April, but none of these other rallies? Well, again, the rationale is when you look at the ETH Bitcoin valuation, you'll notice that it was dropping up until April. And the reason why I think it bottomed back in April was because every time Ethereum goes home to its logarithmic regression trend line, that's when Ethereum bottoms against Bitcoin. And since I thought Ethereum had bottomed against Bitcoin, it made sense to me to take on the risk, and it made sense to call for new all-time high. We also said many times that while Ethereum would likely fall back down and drop into a macro higher low, that alts would put in lower lows on their Bitcoin pairs. Remember that? And again, I tried explaining this as intricately as I could, and it sounded absolutely crazy. But there's what sounds crazy and there's what actually happened. Because you can see that ETH Bitcoin still has a chance here to form a higher low, whereas the altcoin market on their Bitcoin pairs put in a lower low. Total 3 minus USDT divided by Bitcoin just went all the way down to 0.29. If you subtract out USDC as well, it went to 0.25, right? Which is a target we've called for a long time, 25% of Bitcoin's market cap, the collective altcoin market. It already went to 0.25. Others Bitcoin, right? The valuation of others against Bitcoin just put in a new cycle low. It went all the way down to 0.08. Now, what's interesting is others divided by Bitcoin just went to the same level that it went to in December of 2020. Right? So the point here that I want to make is the same thing I've been talking about forever, right? And that is that it's easy for influencers to just call for alt season every single lower high. But the reality, the sobering reality, is that these guys that shilled altcoins the entire way down now require an alt season just to get to potentially breaking even on their Satoshi valuation, right? It's like if alts rallied against Bitcoin several 100%, they still might not even break even because they've been riding the altcoin market down for years. And the reason why I thought Ethereum had a better chance of putting in a higher low is because I thought it had been sufficiently wrecked for this cycle, right? ETH Bitcoin had already been what I would consider to be sufficiently wrecked back over here in April of 2025. But this constant devaluation was not seen yet by the altcoin market back then, right? If you look at alt Bitcoin pairs, they didn't really have that same rapid devaluation, that sense of hopelessness. Then that was why it was easy to stay bearish on alt Bitcoin pairs and stay bullish on Bitcoin dominance, right? That's the reason.
Conviction is tested, and patience separates traders from investors. Ethereum seems to be standing right at that point. After a textbook correction and months of proving its resilience, it's beginning to show signs of renewed strength while the rest of the altcoin market struggles to find footing. The structure of this cycle feels different. Ethereum isn't just reacting to Bitcoin's rhythm anymore, it's carving its own pattern of recovery. Momentum has shifted from noise to strategy, each move echoing the balance between long-term confidence and short-term uncertainty. If this rhythm holds, Ethereum could once again set the tone for the broader crypto market, redefining what leadership looks like in digital assets. So the real test ahead isn't about price, it's about endurance. Will Ethereum's quiet strength evolve into the kind of breakout that reignites investor confidence, or are we watching the calm before another round of market shakeouts? So stay tuned. If you're into real, data-backed takes on the financial system, hit like and subscribe so you don't miss the weekly updates. Thank you for the support, and I hope you enjoy the video.